those struggles when they hit us, obstacles when they hit us, they feel very real. But what I realized was the world's actually coming from us, not at us. And therefore, that's a positive thing because I can affect change.
Someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Taking a walk every day offers amazing benefits, both for your mind and your body. It's a fantastic way to unwind, reduce stress, enhance your mood, and decrease the likelihood of depression. As you're gearing up for your stroll, I'm thrilled that you're tuning in for our conversation with Navy veteran John Gucci Foley, a former lead solo pilot of the Blue Angels. Gucci is no ordinary achiever. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and has been selected as top 10 carrier pilot 6 different times, and he's completed over 300 aircraft carrier landings. With 3 master's degrees in his pocket, Gucci has created the glad to be here mindset and the Diamond Performance Framework, which have inspired teams and organizations worldwide. Get ready for Gucci's remarkable journey and learn how gratitude has shaped his life. Hey, Gucci, welcome to the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast. I'm glad to be here with you today.
Hey, Danny, so glad to be with you and glad to be with all your listeners. This is powerful what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to sharing anything you want.
Well, I really appreciate that. And as our listeners fire up their Strava app for their virtual walk, I'm really eager to hear about your journey from a child at an air show to becoming a naval pilot.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was born in Germany. I came from a military family. My dad was in the Army, and we happened to be assigned in Germany there. And as a military brat, those of you who are in the military know you move around a lot, right? So I lived in so many different places, but I'll never forget, we were in Newport, Rhode Island. My dad was going to the Naval War College, and he goes, hey, let's go to an air show this weekend. And I'll never forget that moment, Danny, where I'm standing at Quonset Point. I'm about 12 years old, and I'm looking up in the sky. And, you've been to an air show, right, Danny? Have you ever been to a Blue Angel air show?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's visceral, right? You're not just seeing it. You feel it, you can feel the jet noise and the crowd and the energy, and you can smell the smoke oil in the air. I'm not kidding you, Danny. It was one of those things where it hit me in the heart, not just the head. And I ain't no kidding. I remember turning to my dad that day, and up to then I wanted to be an Army officer because I loved him and that's what he was. I looked at him and said, Dad, I'm going to do that. That's what I want to do. And that was it, man. That was one. It hit me in the heart, and he was super supportive of that. And it was a journey. It took me 18 years, by the way, from that moment to strapping on that blue flight suit.
That's absolutely incredible that you were able to make that connection over the course of those 18 years from a 12-year-old watching that and change the direction. But I know that journey for you came with many different obstacles, from getting into the Naval Academy to flying the jet that you wanted. How did you handle any of the setbacks that you experienced, and what lessons did you learn along the way?
Yeah, well, great question. I think all of us hit obstacles, right? And one thing I've learned looking back is that it's never a straight line. In fact, rarely does it ever turn out the way you expect it to. But I think the key is having that vision, having that view of where you're trying to go so clear. And I've noticed this difference. It's got to be in your heart, not just your head, right? And what I noticed for me is that, once that hit me in the heart, I knew I needed to join the Navy, right? And there's different paths to do that. I attempted to go to the academies. I got rejected. They said I was not physically qualified, which surprised me. So I had to go through a year-long medical waiver process, which I turned into a positive. I said, well, shoot, I'll go to a real college. Went to Colorado, played football, walked on. I mean, really had a lot of fun, but it wasn't my dream, right? It's not what I wanted to do. Eventually got that medical waiver, got into the academies. Now, I got to be straight with you, Danny. I'm not the greatest student, okay? I didn't finish number 1 in my class. I finished in the half that allows the other half to be called the top, by the way. And but it was one of those things where all I wanted was a pilot slot. That was my goal, right? And fortunately, I got that barely. And then I realized I needed to kind of change my mindset, because being average wasn't going to work to get to where I wanted to go, which was the Blue Angels. But most people know that you got to become a carrier pilot, and there's different type of pilots in the Navy, so first thing I wanted to do was get jets, and so you go through flight school, and fortunately I did get the jets, but I didn't get the fancy airplanes, coming out of back in the day. This was in the what was this? 84. A lot of people weren't even alive then, right? That's when I got my wings, and they didn't give me the cool fancy jet. I wanted the F-18, and they said no. And so gave me an A7, which wasn't fancy. And just like anything, you got to work your way up. I did get the chance to fly the F-14. Nate Topps Qualden there was in the original movie Top Gun, but not because they picked me to be a great pilot. Danny, it's life. I was in the right place at the right time. That's all. We were on the Carrier Enterprise when Hollywood came out to film the movie, and we just did our normal stuff, right? But everything didn't happen the way I expected. One day, Danny, I shot a missile by mistake. Okay. Yeah, I know. Look at your eyes. Yeah, this is not a good thing, right?
No, talk about a negligent discharge.
Oh man, exactly. And I almost shot down my own boss, by the way. So not only did I shoot the wrong missile, it almost hit him because it was a heat-seeking missile. I got to tell you, when that came off the rails, and I was trying to jettison some ordnance at the time, and I had gotten the switchology mixed up. So instead of the bomb, which was stuck on my airplane, being jettisoned off, the missile went. And when that thing comes off, you can hear it. I mean, it comes off right by your ear. It's like, and I'm like, come back, that's a real old shit moment if you've ever had one in your life, right? Mm-hmm. And bottom line was my mistake. It took me 3 days to figure out the root cause of that mistake, which was I'd gotten too complacent. I'd gotten too comfortable carrying live ordnance. And those of us who have carried live ordnance realize that the first time you do it, it's scary, man. The little hairs stand up and you get too comfortable. And that's where mistakes happen. And that was a good lesson I learned in life for not just carrying live ordnance, but other things in life. What are we getting too comfortable with that we really shouldn't? Texting and driving is a big deal, right? And there's so many things in our lives that I've learned to be a little bit more mindful about. But I got grounded. You can imagine that, walking into my commanding officer, and they could have fired me. They came close. We did the investigation, but bottom line was the Marines bailed me out. They made me an instructor pilot in the Marine F-18 rag, and after about a year, I got selected for the Blue Angels, and then my life changed. So it all works out. It just sometimes doesn't go the way you expect.
An incident like that of making such a potentially catastrophic mistake would generally be something that we try to hide and keep away from general public knowledge. Only a few, people would know about that. How did you get so comfortable speaking about it and sharing that with others?
Oh, because, it's first off, we all got to be authentic and open and honest, right? And it wasn't the mistake. What I learned was the complacency was a lesson that I just needed to learn. And we all have lessons in life that I believe that we need to learn, right? And if you've learned that, the greatest gift you can do is share that with someone else. That's why, in the military, but specifically in the Blue Angels, we do this debriefing process that's very unique on the Blues. And it's all about looking inward first and identifying yourself. Where could you have done, something better? Or if there was a mistake, calling it out and not waiting for someone else to call it out on you. Why? Because I don't want that other person to make that mistake. I want them to learn from my mistakes and also learn from whatever good things I've done. But I've heard this once, that people connect more to your vulnerability than they do to your strengths. And that's been true in my life.
Absolutely. I mean, there's something powerful when we share our testimony, our journey with another person in an authentic way. It goes much further than that head knowledge. And I love that, you guys developed that mentality of learning through wisdom. There's an old quote that I know of like a fool doesn't learn from his mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of another. And a smart person learns from their own. And it's just like the Blue Angels during that time that you were in, it sounds like you guys were learning from wisdom.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the word wisdom. I also love reading the scriptures, and I love reading, Proverbs, where it talks so much about wisdom, right? And I think there's a difference between knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. To me, knowledge there's a ton of that. You can get that on the internet, you can get that all over the place. But until we learn how to apply it, it's not that useful, right? So to me, understanding is you not only have the knowledge, but you know how to apply it. But that's not wisdom, right? You see, the difference is wisdom is knowing the when and maybe when not to apply it, right? That's the real skill, right? That's the real essence that I think you have to learn through life experiences, right? And so I'm with you, man. I'm constantly seeking wisdom. And I hope we find some of that in this show.
I know that we will. I mean, you wrote an amazing book that has a ton of wisdom, and you're talking a little bit about the Blue Angels. I've had the opportunity to speak to one other Blue Angel pilot. And he said something that you kind of touch
intake,
on.
Right? Was it
yes, intake? Yeah. And,
Gucci says hi.
Gucci says hi. I will pass that on. He had mentioned, and you mentioned in your book, that flying with the Blue Angels isn't necessarily dangerous, but you went on to explain that it's inherently unforgiving. I mean, you're feeling over 7 Gs of force on your body. You're executing maneuvers within within 36 inches of a 500-ton aircraft.
No, 22-ton, 500 miles
22
per
ton.
hour. Yeah,
there we go. You said it so much better than me. How do you manage that balance between mitigating the risks and executing such precision? Like what advice do you give to others that are navigating such high risk situations?
Yeah, well, absolutely. The first response is a process I call a cadence of execution, which I think we all need to have in life, right? You got to be prepared, mentally and physically prepared. Use the concept of visualization. It's a tool I use. We use it on the Blues. But that's not the big part. We all can do that. The big part is learning from the event. So the debrief portion, right? So it's a brief, execute, debrief mindset that I like to talk about. Get prepared, execute, and be adaptive when you're executing, okay? And then debrief and learn from it, and also celebrate your victories. So that's what I call the process side of what you just asked. What's actually more important is the mindset side of that. And that's what I like to call belief levels, right? So just that comment, and it's interesting you pulled that out of the book. What we did wasn't dangerous, but it's inherently unforgiving. I actually said that on a documentary that was filmed in 1992 when we took the team to Moscow. We took the team over to Europe, right? And they asked me some questions. And as I reflected back on that, because I don't even remember saying it, right? As I reflected back on that, I said, wow, see, that's a mindset right there. And I think that's the critical portion that we all need to become aware of is where's our mindsets? Okay. Where are we limiting ourselves? Where are we liberating ourselves? Because you could say flying 18 inches or 36 inches from a 22-ton jet at 500 miles per hour, sometimes upside down, by the way, is absolutely crazy. And I would say no. Okay. I'd say no, but it is unforgiving. So we have to have our processes and mindsets aligned. But it's the mindset first that allows us to grow.
And I'm really excited to jump into the mindset and framework that you're mentioning. But before we do, you mentioned your time of service was in the 80s and 90s. And, the military is constantly working on process improvements. And a lot of criticism in modern day military veterans is the transition process. And we've been constantly improving that over the decades. So what was your transition experience like for you going from such a decorated career into the civilian sector?
Oh, great question. And it's such a challenge. I just got off the phone right before you and I jumped on with an '05, a good friend of mine, the XO of the Blues, who's in that process. And also we're sharing some of this advice, right? And just knowledge. So for me, I actually use schooling as a bridge. I think we sometimes need a bridge to get from one career to another. I think the first thing that I learned was it's actually fun to reinvent yourself. And so that's the mindset. After the Blues, you go back to flying jets off aircraft carriers. But at some point, all of us in the military, it's time to move on, whether it's your choice or theirs. It doesn't matter. It's just time to move on. Right. And I remember, I had some good role models. My dad showed me you could have multiple careers. He was a colonel in the Army, very, very successful, and then became very successful in the corporate world. He ran all the water in Southern California, chairman of the board of Metropolitan. And I watched him. And I watched, at the dinner tables, the kind of conversations. And so I wasn't afraid. I think that's the first step is, try to overcome the fear of, oh my God, what am I going to do? How do I survive again and whatnot? And know that those are real thoughts. I call them being scared's okay, but being afraid, I try to stay away from. And the way I show the differentiation is scared's good, man. Scared's those little hairs that stand up on the back of your neck. Scared says, hey, I got to take some action or I got to be prepared. That's all great. Fear will cause you stuckness, right? Fear is totally different, right? And we've all experienced fear in deeper levels. And so I try to just remind myself that it's okay to be scared. Okay, so that's the first part. And then find some people to help you in that transition and give yourself a little bit of time. So I actually went to school, and that schooling opened up a whole new world to me. My classmates, I learned from them. I was in Silicon Valley right around 2000, 2001. There's a lot happening, that was pretty exciting. And I realized I wasn't an expert on it, but the one thing I did know was, I knew teamwork and I knew people. And I think that's one thing all veterans, we know at a really high level, how to be a good teammate, how to, help others and help yourself. And it's that purpose higher than self. It's the we thinking that, don't undervalue that. If you're a veteran and you're listening to this, you have a lot of value to any civilian organization because you know how to do that. And that's what I'd lean on.
And that's such a good mindset and great distinction between being scared and living in fear, because that fear, like you mentioned, will paralyze us. It will keep us from being able to move on to the next step. And then one of the things that you just mentioned was giving yourself the time to learn, the time to reinvent. So much of our society, regardless of what time frame in history you're living in, says that things need to be done now. Things need to happen now. And the reality is for most of us, life is long and it has many different roads that we can take. And so giving yourself that time and giving yourself the permission to not have to be always acting, but we can set ourselves up as a student to learn new paths, to learn new things. And so I just love that you touched on that.
I love that you mentioned the word learn, because in my story it wasn't a clear path. Like getting out of school, I thought I was going to go work for a friend of mine who I had met, friends are a relative term, as CEO. And I went through all the interview process, 7 interviews. They're going to hire me. And then I get a phone call saying, hey, we can't hire you. We got to lay off 5,000 people. And so I thought I had a path, boom, gone, right? So now it starts all over again. A buddy of mine says, why don't you come work with us in venture capital? I started doing private equity in Silicon Valley, and I knew nothing about that, right? And I was struggling, man. I mean, because everybody else knew about technology and they knew this. So I'm working really hard. And finally, one day I got the, hey, the stars aren't aligned lecture, where somebody pulls you outside and says, hey, Gucci, the stars aren't aligned, which means you're fired, basically. That's just a nice way to say you're fired. And that happened to me. And I was like panicking at first. I'm like, no, I can do this. I can do that. And finally I was like, you know what? They're right. I mean, I'm paddling water uphill. It's not the career that I want. Then I got into started my own company, and it was going to be rolling up the air show industry and creating competition, which Red Bull did, by the way. But guess what happens? 9/11 comes, okay? And I'm actually closing an equity deal with ESPN in Manhattan on that day. And that day changed a lot of lives, by the way, a lot more than mine. But I saw the towers come down and I went, holy shit. Besides, I ran towards them instead of away from them, seeing if I could help. And most military people, that's just our training. And there was nothing I could do, by the way. I couldn't even give blood. They weren't even taking blood. I went to the hospital. They're like, we have nobody to do. But the bottom line was that career blew up in an instant. And so now I'm broke, by the way, $243,000 in debt of my own personal money on credit cards at 25% interest. Do that math. It sucks pretty quickly, right? And then I got dumped by the relationship I was in. She dumps me, So, I mean, we've all been through struggles, right? And the bottom line was it allowed me to then end up just by chance going to an event on personal growth. Because I said, man, I need some personal growth. And the person who was leading that talked about the psychology behind visualization. And he asked me to speak because he knew I was a Blue Angel. And I just started to talk about how we did it. And a light bulb moment, Danny, is like high performance teams. Turn that into the business results. I know how to do that. And that started the current career, which now for 2 decades has been a huge blessing. So, a lot of missteps, but 3 years later, I fell into what I really was meant to do.
Man, Gucci, life was piling it on you at the turn of the millennia. Like, talk about being afraid of Y2K. You just had everything happen right after it. You've been given names like the mindset master and the gratitude guru for a reason. And I think this is part of it, right? Like your ability to say these things with a smile like myself. When people hear me, they say these things, and I usually say them with a smile like you're doing. They don't understand the amount of angst that went through being grateful to have those experiences. And that's a lot of what your glad to be here mindset talks about, and why it's so impactful and beautiful way to approach life is to say, these bad things happen or these hard things happen, but that doesn't make them bad or negative in my life. I can learn from them. Could you explain to our listeners a little bit about more of what this glad to be here mindset really entails?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I'll be honest with you, at the time, I didn't know what I know now. So sharing it backwards helps. And that is that, it's those struggles when they hit us, obstacles when they hit us, they feel very real. But what I realized was the world's actually coming from us, not at us. Interesting point if you want to go deeper there, right? So initially you feel like the world's coming at you and it's out of your control. And that causes a lot of fear and stuckness. And what I realize now is that actually, no, the world's coming from me, not at me. And therefore that's a positive thing because I can affect change, right? And the change that I really want to affect is starting with gratitude. So even in those moments, that you can find something to be grateful for. Now, I don't wait for those moments to be grateful. I try to do it every day, build that resiliency, build that reservoir. So one thing that I like to do is I call my glad to be here wake up. And that's every morning when I wake up. You can train your brain to wake up happy, by the way. It's positive, there's neuroplasticity. And one of the ways you train your brain is just what are you grateful for in the present moment? So as soon as my eyeballs open up, I've trained myself to think about not what's the next problem I have. Don't check my iPhone. I just go, well, what am I grateful for in the present moment? And every day's different. Like you're traveling, you and your wife, you're waking up in a new place every day, right? And the same with me. I do a lot of traveling, but today I'm home. I'm home in Sun Valley, and I just woke up and I said, wow, I'm home today. That's something I'm grateful for. Hey, it just snowed last night. And that's cool because I'm a skier, So, hey, I got 2 inches of snow. That ain't much, but it's something, right? And my point is, whatever's in the present moment, I've learned to connect back to the present moment and find something grateful for. And then here's another technique I've learned is instead of stopping right there, I go back 24 hours or go back as far as you want in the week or your life and just start to reflect on what do you have grateful for? What happened yesterday? And that's why 24 hours works. Just a person's smile. I think about that. And then here's the last technique, because I think there's three. So it's present moment, go back 24 hours, but then go forward in your day and just set a personal intention. Like you came up in my mind. I said, hey, I'm going to get the rare privilege to be with Danny on the podcast. And hopefully this helps somebody. And I just put that intention into my head this morning. Simple technique, man. And you do that, brother. And anybody out there who's struggling, just start and you'll see over time how it makes you feel.
I love that morning routine, and I am so glad to be here with you today, Gucci. When you're talking about finding those things to be grateful for, I had a mentor a long time ago tell me sometimes I can just be grateful for the air in my lungs.
Yes.
Grateful that I get to take another breath, because sometimes, the year that I was experiencing some of my greatest loss in the military, I was just notified that I wasn't going to have the 30-year career that I was planning. My marriage at the time was falling apart. I was losing financial security. I was having to move out of my beautiful home. Didn't know where I was going to go. And I was living with roommates for the first time in like 10 years. And I was like, what is going on? Why am I on this path? And my mentor just looks at me and goes, do you have breath in your lungs? Then you have a good day. And, sometimes it's just searching for that. And in addition to your glad to be here mindset, you take it even further. Once you're able to establish that attitude of gratitude, that daily practice, you're able to apply it to what you call the Diamond Performance Framework, which is one of the parts talks about raising your belief levels. And many veterans, myself included, sometimes I hold on to some limiting beliefs, like being diagnosed with PTSD means that I won't be able to do certain things, right? But I also recognize that as a limiting belief. So how do we start to change and start changing those belief systems?
Well, I love it. So two big questions you asked me. I'll go first back to where the Diamond Performance Framework come up with. It's just because it's part of the Blue Angels flying a diamond. I thought it sounded cool, but it actually came from when I was in Stanford Business School. They talk about strategic management theory. Talks about vision, plan, execute, feedback loop. So that's normal, right? What's a vision? Come up with a plan, execute on a plan. Hopefully you have a feedback loop. And I said, okay, that works. And it does, right? But that's not what happened on the Blues. And that's not what's unique. And that is, it's not about vision. What it's really about is beliefs. So back to your question is the first step starts on what do you believe? And I was at an event and this PhD on psychology was talking about, the idea that we as human beings, we don't perform at a full potential. What we perform at is a belief level. So if you're able to elevate your belief level, your performance will follow. And then I took it a little further. I said, if I can elevate a team's belief level, the team's performance will follow. If I can elevate a whole organization's belief or a family's belief, then success will follow, right? And so I had a light bulb moment. I said, it starts with beliefs. And that's where that starts with. So create a vision, but more importantly, make sure it's in your heart, right? Because you're going to only rise to the level that you believe. And the Blues do a pretty cool job of instilling beliefs, because when you get selected for the team, your first ride is in the back seat, okay? And I'll never forget taking off the runway, 4 jets line up and our wings are overlapped. And boss says, military power, burners ready now, off brakes now, boom. And we jump off the runway, we go slice underneath the wingtip. You see these flames coming out of the jet, the airplane shaking, there's metal all around you. And these guys start going straight up. And I'll tell you, my eyes got this big, and I'm a carrier pilot, got all this flight time. I was an instructor pilot, and this was a whole new level. Right? And they didn't talk about it. They showed me first. And then this is what happened. And then they kind of put their arm around you and say, And guess what? There's a process. We're behind you. There's support. You can do this, and we're going to make sure that we get you through it. And that was a huge moment of raising your belief, but knowing that there's people that are there to help you. And I think you right now, just think, look at the people that you're helping. So I think it's pretty cool. That's raising beliefs.
Well, I appreciate that. And, these limiting beliefs that we do have about ourselves, they can, for me, they point me at areas that I should address. When I start saying, oh, I can't do that, I start saying, well, why can't I do that? Right. And so we start looking at not necessarily what we can't do, but the reasoning, the reasons that hold us back from our performance, that we could start making improvements. And that's what you do a lot of with your current work is helping people improve their organizations, improve their teams, or improve themselves with your Glad to Be Here debrief. What does approaching this debrief with gratitude and reframe process look like?
Yeah, so I'll give you the one for personal, like in the evenings, I try to do this. You can do it anytime during the day, but it's just a reflection process back on the day. If it's a business, here's what we start with is I just first start with a feeling statement. How do I feel about today? And it's okay to feel shitty. All right. It's okay to say, I don't feel comfortable about it. Right. It's just being honest with yourself. Right. So how do I feel? 2, is there anything that was out of parameters that I did? So it's called a safety on the Blue Angels. If you got, let's say, out of parameters, you were moving around too much. It's not that you're moving around too much. The safety is you need to clear. Okay. If the procedure is, if you get out of position, you can need to clear a formation. If you didn't clear and you hung in there when you're not supposed to, that's a safety. So you call yourself out for being out of parameters. So I just reflect back on my day and I say, is there anything that I did that was out of parameters? I just want to, and then if it was, you just say, okay, I acknowledge it, I'll fix it, kind of thing, right? But the third piece is and this is where I want most people to focus on, is acknowledge somebody else. Find something good. It's a little different than the glad to be here wake up, but find something good that happened and just acknowledge that. Or if you can find something good in somebody else, that's even more powerful. Did I witness somebody do something kind? Just acknowledge that to yourself. And then I physically, mentally say to myself, glad to be here. I'm glad to be breathing. So that's the reflective piece I like to do at the end of the day, or you could do it anywhere. And I learned that from the Blue Angels. If you set the tone where it's a safe environment, you open and honest, you lay it on the table, you take personal responsibility and you don't blame it on somebody else. And that's hard, man. But you take personal responsibility, and then you realize that it's all okay. It's glad to be here. That's what gave me the resiliency to get through those other moments. And by the way, I never thought they were bad. It's funny. You said I was smiling. I look back at them and I go, oh, that was just that. I needed to go through that. That was a good part of life.
And there's so much that we have to go through so that we can become the people that we were created to be. And in addition to having a framework of gratitude and teamwork, you talk a lot about trust. And when I talk to veterans, especially veterans that are either new out of the military or that have been in combat and maybe haven't started doing personal reflections, trust is a really hard thing for people to come across. I was just on a podcast the other night, and one of the comments that one of the veterans left during the live interview was, it's hard for me to trust people after coming out of combat. So what components do you feel are necessary for people to begin building trust? Like, where should veterans or anybody for that matter start?
Well, I'll give you the kind of personal relationship trust thing is whether it's between individuals in a company or in a family. I think there's what I call the 4 C's of trust. And that is, number 1 is someone competent. So if you're hiring somebody, right? Are they competent in what they're doing? All right. That's the first step. The second one is competency, commitment, character. Is commitment to me is more important, right? Is somebody committed? And can I feel that? Am I committed? Character. What's the character trait of that experience? If I'm trying to build trust with somebody. But the fourth C is consistency, because it's hard to trust somebody or when they're inconsistent, right? So to me, if you think about those and then you put it back on yourself, is, am I competent in whatever I'm trying to do? And the answer is you probably are. And if you're not, get the knowledge and training, right? How committed are you to this, right? Your character, is it impeccable, right? And then, can you build that consistency that will allow people to trust you? And then if you're trustworthy, I think you can start to see that in others. And I guess the other thought that just hit my head is just be kind to yourself. You got to trust yourself first, right? And be kind to yourself, and just see if other people fit into those modes. And if they don't, maybe you shouldn't trust them. There's a lot of reasons not to trust people, and that's okay too.
One of the things I just absolutely love that you mentioned, Gucci, was you put it on the individual to build trustworthiness in themselves. So much of what I talk about with people on a personal level, what I try to express to people on a more public level, is it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves, not everybody else. Especially when it comes to my own mental health. I'm the one that struggles with depression. I'm the one that has suicidal thoughts. I shouldn't have to rely on people to make sure that I am safe. I have to trust myself to be safe. So that means that I have to do the work to make sure that I'm showing up to the places that I say that I'm going to show up. I have to make sure that I'm doing the reflections that I am doing. And once I start to build trust within myself, then I'm able to start trusting that other people are going to be acting according to their own character. And I can choose which people I want to have in my life, but I trust all people that I do have in my life because I trust their character, and that just comes along with building the right community around us, right? When we can be trustworthy individuals, we can trust that the community that we've built around us are also trustworthy individuals. And so that leads me into my final question that I ask all of our guests. And you have such a plethora of experience. You speak to thousands. You and your organization donates millions to nonprofits, especially working in veteran suicide prevention, PTSD, mental health, mindsets, all sorts of different nonprofit work that you've done since 2011, starting your organization, the Glad to Be Here Foundation. What message of hope do you want to share with somebody that is currently going through a mental health crisis of their own?
Well, the first thing I want to say is just be grateful as best that we can, right? And be thankful for what we have. I also think you got to give before you receive, right? So one thing that I've learned is it starts with giving. I have a mantra, and maybe this will help somebody. It's learn, grow, give. Every day, what can I learn? How can I grow, which is different than learning, right? And how can I give? And then I realized I got the order wrong, Danny. It starts with giving, right? And so that's the key. What can you give? And we all have tremendous value. There's always something we can give to somebody else. And yeah, start with the giving. And, I was just at I was helping out at a veterans golf event called Inspiring Warriors Golf. So that's there's so many great veterans associations out there. Find the camaraderie. We really had a really good time there. And there's another group I met, Kevin, it's called the Warrior's Journey. Another great group. If anybody's looking for support, there's so many great groups out there, including what you're doing. And it felt good to be camaraderie. And then guess what we started talking about? After a few beers, we started talking about real life stories back in the day, on the battlefield. And it's sometimes that's cathartic, right? It was good to talk about the shit too. And it was fun. It was actually a great experience.
That's real awesome. Focus on giving. The fact that you continue to grow even as you're teaching others. Gucci, I've really enjoyed the conversation here today. I'd love for our listeners to know where can they find out more information about you and the work that you do?
Well, there's the website. It's johnfoleyinc.com. But there's all kinds of social channels. Just think Gucci, John Gucci Foley. Okay. I don't care if it's on Instagram or YouTube or LinkedIn. But there's lots of stuff out there. And best of all, just keep doing what you're doing. And thank you, Danny, for making such a great difference in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Gucci, for joining me here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Glad to be here.
I hope you found Gucci's story inspiring during your walk today. Remember to track your progress on the Strava app and join our virtual walking group, 1 Mile, 1 Veteran, for daily motivation to stay active. And don't forget, you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.